We're in week number 2 of our series that we started last week called Be Strong. And what we're doing is we're looking at an overview of the life of Joshua. Now, as we're going to go through this series, last week was kind of an introduction to who Joshua was, how he was called into the position that he was. But the rest of them are going to be looking at some of these battles that he faced as he was claiming the gift and the promise that was from God of the promised land for Israel. Today, what we're doing is we're looking at one of the most common stories that we hear about Joshua, and that is the Fall of Jericho. So Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 1, says, "Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. No one went out, and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and its mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do it for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumps. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him.'" So before we move on, I think there's a few things to note here. One is that in verse 1, Jericho was shut up inside, which basically means that Jericho was taking a stance of, we're not going to attack you. So if you want to take this, you're going to have to break down our walls and come in and get us, right? They're not going to bring their people outside. You're going to have to bring your people inside. And why this is significant is because since as we go through, you'll see that Jericho kind of represents these battles that you face in order to get the promised land, the life abundant that God promises you. So all of these battles, anything that stands in your way of experiencing the abundant life, these are these battles that Joshua is going to lead his people to fight so that they can take back the promised land, right? So as Jericho kind of represents these barriers, these walls that we face up against, right? Whether that's our temptations, whether that's sin, whether that's our pride, whether that's whatever it may be, a life situation that makes you feel like I'm not living the life abundant, right? Whatever that is that you're holding on to, those are the things that Jericho is going to represent on the more practical, individual side of things. And so what I'm seeing here and what we should see here is that Jericho kind of represents a strategy of the enemy that makes you feel like it's not a threat. Because Jericho is not actively trying to attack the Israelites. They're not sitting out there on top of their walls shooting arrows at them. They're just inside of their walls. And it seems like it would be really easy for Joshua and all the people to say, well, they're not attacking us right now. Let's just deal with them later. Let's keep on advancing. And then whenever they decide that they're going to turn on us because they see all this other stuff, then we'll attack them. Instead, what appears that Jericho is doing is taking a peaceful stance. They're coming from this position of, we're not going to attack you. If you want this land, you're going to have to take it. And I think when it comes to our spiritual walk, the enemy does that with so many things. Because there are so many times that I've heard people talk about sin where they're like, well, it just doesn't seem harmful to me. I don't see how it can be harmful for me to do something that's explicitly stated as a sin in Scripture. I don't see how that could do any type of damage to me, or it's not damaging me right now, so maybe I shouldn't worry about it. Right? I can quickly make this about our pride. Our pride of life really seems like something that we could go in and say that it's the pride because God has given us these things, when in reality what we're thinking is that God isn't really doing these things. It's really just my own work and my own effort. I earned these things. And that simple pride may seem so small and insignificant that it doesn't need to be attacked. It doesn't need to be addressed. But those are the things that are going to keep you from the life abundant. Jericho, as big as the walls are, seems so small in the eyes of the people of Israel because it's not actively hurting them. It's not something that they think that they need to address. But Joshua receives this command from God and says, even though they're not actively threatening you, they are standing in the way of a life abundant that you've been promised. And so if they're standing in the way, I've already dedicated it for destruction. And so you need to go and be faithful and obedient. So then Joshua receives this command. Said, I want you to grab all of the men of war, all the people of valor. I want you to grab 7 priests, the Ark of the Covenant, and every single day for the next 6 days, you're going to walk and march around the city one time. That's it. You're going to march around the city one time, and then you're going to camp out. Next morning, you're going to get up. You're going to do the same thing again. And Joshua, because of how much faith he has, he's like, all right, let's do it. And then Joshua goes in verses 6 through 9 and commands the people, this is what we're going to do. And they follow him, which is mind-blowing to me. That, like, imagine this. You know you're going into war. He's already sent spies into Jericho. He knows the fortified cities. And instead of all of the strategy that he's probably come up with of, this wall is a little bit weak. Maybe we can break through this way and distract them on this side. And we're thinking of a strategy and a system and a thing. And Joshua's thinking all this. And then he hears from God, I want you to just walk around the city one time. And Joshua is like, that sounds a whole lot easier than what I was planning. But the people of Israel, the men of war, they're ready to go and just start breaking down the wall. Like they're coming with their, hammers and they're ready to just start knocking at the wall, trying to tear it down. And then they hear, no, we're actually just going to do a nice little march around the city. And then once we're done with that one march, well, how many times we're going to march? One time. That's it, just one lap. What are we going to do after that? We're going to go up there and we're going to get back in our tents. We're going to camp out. All day long. It's not going to take us today to what? Yeah, I know. That's what the Lord said. What surprises me is that if I was to tell you, we're working on this building project, and all we got to do is walk around this church one time, you guys would be like, you're nuts. Absolutely not. We just got to walk around all of whatever they define as the boundaries of Poole. And everyone in here is going to be saved. There'd be some of you who'd be like, all right, I'm going to go buy some walking shoes. Others of you would be like, I think I'm going to miss that service. I think I'm going to have something a little bit more important that day that's going to come up instead of walking all the way around Poole Town. But to think of it from a war perspective, think about some of the situations like D-Day. Right? All of these soldiers are coming onto the beach and they're going in, they're getting shot at. Could you imagine? They knew going in, some of us aren't going to leave alive. Most of us are going to be injured because this is part of the strategy to win World War II. And so they roll up, they're getting in their boats, they're starting to see the enemy. And could you imagine the commander saying, hey, put your guns down. What we're going to do is I want you to your left, under your seat, there's a trumpet. And I want you to grab that trumpet and blow it as hard and as loud as you can. That's how we're attacking them. Could you imagine how many of those soldiers would be like, I didn't sign up for this. Like, at least give me a fighting chance coming in. But this is sometimes why we get so frustrated with dealing with our sin. Because you find all these different strategies of how you can get out of your sin, and you work and it still doesn't work. And what God is just calling you to do is to be faithful to him. He's saying just be faithful. Don't ignore it, address it, but be faithful to me. So they're all on board. Every single one of them. And then in verse 10, Joshua commanded the people, you shall not shout or make your voice heard Neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going around it once. They came into the camp, spent the night in the camp. And Joshua rose early the next morning. The priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests, bearing the 7 trumpets of the ram's horn before the Lord, walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and there was a rear guard that was walking with the ark of the Lord while the trumpets blew continually. The second day, they marched around the city once and returned to camp, and they did so for 6 days. So the only sound that's being made is the sound of these trumpets. Now you got to think also from the perspective of the Jericho people. They're hearing all of this racket outside. They look out their window, and all they see is a bunch of people making a lap around their city. So now their guard's down. They don't see any weapons. They don't see anything that seems to be an issue. All they hear is just the terrible sound of all of these trumpets, probably out of tune. And so they're walking around this city. Jericho's putting their guard down, which I think is part of the strategy of the Lord. But as they're walking around, no one is speaking. No one is talking to one another. No one's shouting for 6 days. This was 6 days of silence and solitude. 6 days where they sat in silence, and the only sound that they could hear was the sound of the people in the city going about their business, maybe the animals out in the wilderness where they were at, in the promised land, and the sound of the trumpets once a day, every day, for 6 days. They go around the city. And then verse 15. On the 7th day, they rose early at the dawn of the day, marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent." And so what happens here is the 7th day, there's a change in the command. Instead of just walking around it once, they walk around it 7 times. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that in a minute. I promise, Scott, we'll get to it in a minute. So they go around 7 times around this city, blowing the trumpets. The last time they go through, everyone starts to shout. And in that moment, the walls fall down. They don't fall down because of the sound. They don't fall down because the people started breaking in. They fall down because the Lord is showing the people, I have already overcome this. I've already handed you over to the enemy. I've already found victory for you. You just needed to be faithful. And so they're walking around 7 times, and I can only imagine what the Israelites were probably thinking. One, yesterday it was 1 lap. Now we're doing 7. When I was coaching soccer, I'm not going to look at the ones that I was coaching in soccer. When I was coaching soccer, I remember one time we kind of got used to running 10 laps around the field, and then I told them we're going to run 15 today, right? 5 more, and all of them were like, "Oh, my legs won't be able." You've been running 10 for the past week. It's fine, right? So I imagine some of the Israelites were like, kind of had that moment of like, really? I got used to the 1. Fine with the 1. It's a big city. Do we really got to do it? That seems redundant. That seems excessive, right? We've been doing 1. Why can't God just tear down the walls after we do 1 lap? Why do we have to do 7 laps? Well, they don't ask questions, but it just makes me think like how many people were frustrated just with the simple change in the way that they did things. Because the 1 lap, the 1 time around the city became normal. And then something changes. And when something changes, everyone starts to wonder, why is it changing now? Now, I know we're just talking about a span of 7 days. But in our life, oftentimes we have overcome sin with 1 lap. With 1 march around the city, we find victory over whatever situation. We find victory over whatever. And then it's like the next time, the next sin, the next temptation, the next life situation, the next whatever crisis, you walk, you do the same thing. You pray to God, you go to church, you start being consistent, you start serving because you know that that's been the pattern ever since. Everything in the past, this has been the pattern. I pray a little bit more, I read my Bible a little bit more, it makes me feel better. I start to overcome these things, and then I move on. But then you get to a place to where that doesn't work anymore, to where the one lap isn't enough, that there's a continuation of being faithful to God, that it's not a code to be cracked, but instead it's something that God is saying, once you've done this, I'm going to want more because you need a deeper relationship with me. And as you grow in this deeper relationship with me, you're going to need to be more faithful to me because the battles are going to get heavier. The battles are going to get harder. It's going to take longer. And so there's a continuation of having to be more faithful and to be more faithful without question or without very many questions. You see, what you don't see in this passage, and I'm sure it happened, but what you don't see is people asking God, why is it 7 times? Why do we have to march around the city? Why can't we just go into the city? Right? Like, I know the walls are big and they're fortified. If you look at the geographical location, there's a wall and then there's a hill and then there's another wall. So it made the wall seem really, really tall, even though there's some space in between. But that was strategic for the people of Jericho, because if you broke through the first wall, then you had to go to the second, and it gave them time because you had to go up the hill. And so if they saw that the first wall was being broken into, then they could get their army together and have time. It was to buy them time and to also give the psychological effect that this wall is far bigger than what it actually is. And so as they're walking around, they're wondering, like, why can't we just advance, like distract, do the strategy that Joshua came up with and maybe told some of his leaders about after the messengers and the spies came. But Joshua probably told the people, this is what God desires. And if he got us out of Egypt, if we're now walking and we've crossed over the Jordan and we're in the promised land now, this is standing in our way of having the life abundant, the gift that God's promised us. If he did that back then, who's to say he won't do it now? No matter how insignificant or silly it may seem. It's what God is training his people to do is to be consistent in their devotion, to be consistent in their devotion to him, and to be consistent in being being faithful and obedient to him. And so what happens that 7th time? They blow the trumpets, the people shout, and the walls come down. And what I see this as is that this is consistent throughout. It's consistent worship. Now, worship is not just singing songs. That's part of it, but it's not just singing love songs to Jesus. Right? Worship is every single step that you take. Is that step devoted to God, or is it devoted to yourself? Because if it's devoted to yourself, that step was worshiping yourself. If it's devoting God, then it's worshiping God. It's every action that you take. It's every word that you say. It's being the ambassador of Christ, being a reflection of Christ. This is part of what this whole year is about with the Imago Dei and being made in the image of God, being made in his image and likeness. It's because we're meant to represent God here on earth to all of his other creation. And the way that we do that is to live our lives as God would desire for us to live our lives. Sometimes that does require us to sing some songs that we don't like, but we know it honors God and it pleases God. Other times it's doing things that we don't want to do, but it honors God, and so we do it because it pleases God. Right? Our worship is far more removed from singing. We think of that just because that's our time of worship. That's what we think of when we think of a worship night. We think of, oh, there's going to be a lot of songs sung. I remember a few years ago we did a worship night, and it was like a few days in a row that we did worship nights. And in the middle of that worship night, to kind of break up the songs, there was some type of teaching that was done through video from other people in General Baptist Ministries. And I remember getting the comment afterwards, there wasn't enough singing for this worship night. And I was like, but the word was preached. Because part of worship is hearing God's word. Part of worship is responding and being obedient and faithful to God's word. And if that is singing, then it's singing. If it's not, then it's not. But this whole time, God is training them not only to be faithful, but to worship him every day consistently. And there are going to be some days that you're going to need to worship a little bit more to get through it. You're going to need to do it 7 times, and you're going to be walking around. You're going to be at time number 5, maybe that day, that week, that month, that year, and you're going to be around 5 times, and you're like, nothing's changed. It's getting frustrating. I don't know what else I'm supposed to do. This is all I've been told to do, is to be faithful, to read my Bible, to pray, because I want to hear from God and I want to speak to God. I want to communicate with God. I want to be faithful. I want to hear what he's calling me to do. And what he keeps telling me to do is walk this same route and do the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm just wanting to be called into something more. I'm just wanting to go and conquer something in my life, but instead, all I'm being told is just abide in me, worship me, spend some time with me. And I don't know what is going on in God's mind, but I'm getting tired of worshiping. I'm getting tired of sitting here and doing the same thing over and over and over again. Right, I imagine the 5th, maybe 6th time, people were walking around and they're like, this is boring. Doing this over and over and over again. Where's the excitement? Where's the land flowing with milk and honey that why are we all we're doing is just marching around this stupid city? But the point is that they kept going. And what happens in your life is that when you worship consistently, when you're consistent and disciplined in your worship and you're just following every single day what God's called you to do that day. It's waking up early every morning or late every morning if you can. You wake up and you look at God and you're like, what are you calling me to today? I may know what you're calling me to do over some of my life, over the next few years. I may know what you're calling me to do this month. What are you calling me to be today? And for most of us, I just want you to be a good parent. I want you to be faithful to me so that you're a good parent and that you lead your kids into an everlasting life. I just want you to be faithful to your wife. Just want you to be faithful to your husband. I want you to go and whenever you see someone struggling, to go and just give them an encouraging word. It's like, well, God, that's just so small and simple and insignificant. And he's hopefully going to remind you, my prayer is that he reminds you, but so was marching around a city. It meant nothing other than the fact that's what I called them to do. And because they were obedient the 7th day, they were obedient day 1 through day 6, and they continued to be obedient on day 7. Listening to the commands of the guy that I appointed to be the leader, because they knew that he was going to be seeking God. And when they listened to him, they were listening to me, and since they were faithful, I gave them the city. I gave them and let them see and taste the victory. Not only so that they would have victory over that, but they would see if God is for us now, who can be against us with the next battle and the next one and the next one. You see, something that really struck me is that even though this is very much an individual, like we typically preach this as an individual, this is your battle. whatever battle you're facing. And that is true, because that's a practical application of it. But there's so much more going on in this passage. Because what you'll find is in Joshua 6, there are 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns, and on the 7th day, marching around the city, there's a little bit of silence before the trumpets blew and the shouts came. And in Revelation chapter 8, the opening of the 7th seal brings silence in heaven. 7 angels are given 7 trumpets. And those 7 angels blow their trumpets to begin the judgment, the final judgment of all of the world. And when the 7th angel blows his trumpet in Revelation chapter 11, loud voices declare, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord. And in Revelation 18, Babylon falls with the declaration, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And this echoes Jericho's destruction. And so what you find in the lens of the New Testament, looking back at Joshua's story, is that this is being symbolic. Even though this did happen in history and it did have a historical context, the overarching view of the Bible is that Joshua's story is a foreshadowing of what's going to happen when Christ comes back. That just like there were 7 priests that were blowing trumpets, there are 7 angels that are going to be blowing those trumpets. And when the last one, when the 7th one is blown, there's going to be shouts from heaven saying, all that we have been promised by God is going to take place. The kingdom of the earth is now the kingdom of our Lord. And on that day, there will be no more tears. There will be no more pain. There will be no more suffering, because Christ has come and destroyed all and dedicated all evil things to destruction. And so everything, as it says in the book of Joshua, everything that's in there, besides Rahab, who was faithful to God, and the resources that are needed, all of them are to be devoted to destruction. And that's exactly what the people did. They destroyed absolutely everything. And that's what God's going to do on the last day. Everything that is evil, everything that is standing in your way of having a perfect and holy relationship with God is going to be destroyed. And so you're not going to experience death anymore. You're not going to experience grief anymore. You're not going to experience anxiety anymore. You're not going to experience defeat anymore, because Christ has already won. Babylon has fallen. Jericho has fallen. The part that struck me the most is that after Joshua says the instructions of what is to be saved and what is to be destroyed, in Joshua 6:26, this is where I'm ending today. It says, Joshua laid an oath on them at the time, saying, cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up his gates. What Joshua is saying is whatever, and what he says earlier too, if you try to rebuild this city, if you take some of the things that were devoted to destruction and you keep it because you like it, because you desire it, you will be destroyed too. And so my question is, what are the things in your life that's preventing you from having that life abundant that you're holding on to, that's from Jericho? Christ has already broken down all of the walls for you to walk in and claim victory, and you're still picking up some things. You're like, oh, surely this won't hurt. Surely this won't bring any destruction. And what Joshua warns, and I think what God is also warning, is that when you do that, when you say, I've found victory over everything, and I'm going to take a little bit of pride because I did this. I'm going to take a little bit of credit because, I did march around the city. Over here, I know this is a sinful thing in my life, but I'm not ready to let go of it right now. And so all of the rest of it I found victory over, but I'm going to hold on to these a little bit longer to see if my theology changes, if my doctrine changes, or if the doctrine of my church changes so that I can continue to hold on to this and not feel guilty about it. And when you're holding on to those things in that last day, on Judgment Day, what Joshua will say is that you will bring destruction upon Israel, meaning you're going to bring destruction not only on you, but on your family. And so your family is going to be affected by these things that you kept. And this is speaking more so to husbands as the head of the household. The sin that you deal with, the things that you're picking up from Jericho, and you're like, I want to hold on to these just a little bit longer. The pride that you have, that you're earning all of this stuff that God's giving you. He's given you the opportunities. He's given you the jobs. He's given you the resources, yet you still want to claim that as your own, right? When you're holding on to that, what God is saying is that there will be some level of destruction because you've held on to these things. They may seem small, they may seem insignificant, they may seem to bring no harm, but they were devoted for destruction. And all evil things will be destroyed. And if you're holding on to these evil things close to your heart, you will also be destroyed. And if you have led your family to believe that these things are okay, that these things are to be celebrated, that this is the way that you're to think about life, you'll bring destruction upon them too. This is the warning that we have as we wait for the Lord to return. Curse before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city. What I see in our world is a lot of people building a lot of different Jerichos. A lot of different cities and families and communities that are built on things that are complete rebellion against God. And our job as Christians is to spend time being faithful and worshiping God and advancing into those communities when he calls us to. But if we're not actively listening to him, we won't get the command to go. We won't know when's the right time. We'll march a couple times around. We'll spend a couple days and we'll be like, that marching was probably good enough. I've only prayed a few times. I've been praying for a couple years. That's probably good enough for me to go. And if you're not actively listening to God, you won't know when to advance. And so you got to figure out in your life, because I don't know. I don't know your life. I don't know what you're holding on to. But you've got to find out and figure out what you're holding on to that is displeasing to the Lord so that you can tear those things down and say, God, I give this back to you. You take it so you can destroy it, but I don't want to be within 5,000 meters or yards or whatever. I don't want to be anywhere near it. I don't want to be close to it. Right? You take that, you destroy it in my life so that that way I'm living a life that's abundant and that's pleasing to you. That's another question for you to wrestle with this week. So what's that thing? What'd you take from Jericho? What are you holding on to? Or maybe it's, why did you stop marching? Why'd you stop being faithful? Were you discouraged? Because if that's the case, I just want to let you know, based on this story and so many times in my own life, and there's a multitude of people who also have a shared experience where God has fought and won a battle for them. Keep marching. Keep worshiping. Because your life and the lives around you depend on it.